Serials in print, on radio, even on television have always been hugely popular. And in today's fragmented high-tech media universe, that's no less true. But like everything else, those serials have gone digital, and they've got their own name now: podcasts. Joining us now for a look at the medium, how it's changing storytelling and the media landscape, 4 podcasters in town for the first ever Hot Docs Podcast Festival. Phoebe Judge is host of Criminal on Radiotopia. Wendy Zuckerman is host of Science Versus on Gimlet Media. Andrew Norton is the host-producer of Completely Optional Knowledge, presented by Greenpeace. And Lindsay Michael is co-host and producer of the podcast playlist on CBC. And it's great to welcome you 4 podcasters here at TVO tonight. Thank you for coming in. Phoebe, to you first. Criminal, what's its mission?
Well, I think, Criminal is a show about crime, but our idea is that crime is not just one thing. Crime is not all sad or all bad or all blood and, gore. We show crime in ways that I think are surprising, and always at the base of these stories is the individual. So these are people whose lives have been touched by crime in some way, but the show is about people. And the topic is crime. And so sometimes the shows are funny and sometimes the shows are very dark. But our hope is to surprise people with that broad word that crime is.
Why your interest in crime in particular?
Well, when we started Criminal in 2013, we came up with the idea of it. There were really no crime shows at that point on the radio or very few in podcasting. And so we thought to ourselves, this is a compelling topic that not many people are doing, and we will never run out of stories. So, that was really the impetus. This is something that we know we will always have something to talk about. And crime is we are drawn to crime stories, for good or bad. We are drawn to these stories, and they touch on kind of the base human emotions. And so we thought, why not try it?
I was telling you before we went on, I listened to the episode you did on Bobby Tolan, the former Major League Baseball player whose son was shot and who still got a piece of bullet in his liver by a police officer who shot him. Why would that cop talk to you? I was thinking the whole time, this is a cop who did something not great, and he's here talking to you. Why do people talk to you?
Well, the Tolan family talked to us. The cops didn't talk to us, and that's what we come across a lot. So in that episode, we used the actual after-the-fact investigative recording that the detectives did with the cop, and that's how we showed that side of the story. But why does anyone talk to us? I don't know, because people want to tell their stories. And
you fooled me there. I thought the cop in the piece was actually you having interviewed him.
Well, good. I think no one who doesn't want to, is not ready to talk about what's happened to them will talk to us. And that's, I think, and you don't want to talk to anyone who's not ready to talk to you, because that's not a good interview.
Right.
And so that's what we've come to realize, is that if someone says, okay, I'll be interviewed, then you've got a story. And if you have to push them to be interviewed, it's probably not a story you'd want to do anyway.
Gotcha. Okay, Wendy, what's Science Versus?
Science Versus is a podcast that looks at the science behind everyday fads and myths and ideas in the community. So we've looked at fracking, Science Versus fracking. So we look at the science behind it. Is it great? Is it horrible? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And this sort of thing. We looked at the G-spot. Does it exist? All sorts of topics.
What's the answer to that?
You got to listen to find out, don't you?
You, as we can tell from the accent, are not from around here.
No.
You're an Aussie.
I'm an Aussie,
yeah.
That's right.
But you don't live there anymore, eh?
No, we started making the show at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and then it got picked up at Gimlet Media.
And Gimlet Media is who?
Gimlet Media is based in New York. It's Alex Bloomberg's little baby. He was on Planet Money and This American Life, and then he launched a podcasting network. So now we are part of that.
And you've moved to the States now?
Yeah.
You ready for you-know-who? Donald?
We try to stay as apolitical as possible in Science Versus and focus on the facts.
Back to science then, back to science. Why do you think, having looked at so many different topics from a scientific point of view, why do you think there are so many people who believe things for which there is absolutely no evidence?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think people have this idea that intuition is true, so they place a lot of importance on their gut feeling. and it makes it very difficult to put facts that are against that gut feeling. You know, whether it's something about superstition, I just feel that it's wrong. I just feel that it's right. I think organic food is good for me. So people do that, but then obviously people's intuition is being exploited by marketers and lobby groups and things like that. So it's this like horrible mixture of people's intuition that is then being exploited, I think.
Do you know whether you change anybody's mind after they listen to your podcast?
I think for people who have a definite perspective on an issue and they are very passionate about it, say attachment parenting was one. This is the style of parenting where you keep your baby close at all times. At its most extreme ends, you sort of have to breastfeed your child. You can't use strollers, things like that. And we had some parents who emailed and were very angry at the show and said that we took a stance on it, but then the same people emailed and said, I loved your fracking episode. So we can't change everyone's mind, but for people who are sort of in the middle and who just want the facts, we did get a lot of emails from parents who just said, thank you, I didn't know which way was up, I was getting pressured from all sides, I thought I was a terrible parent, thank you. So I think in this sort of media climate, we keep hearing about everyone being so polarized and everyone having these strong opinions. But a lot of the time, there's just people in the middle who just don't really have strong opinions sometimes on particular topics, and then they just want to know the facts. And
well,
I
that's
think
what I was curious about, because I don't know whether you're preaching to the converted, people who only believe in science and therefore would listen to you, or whether you have people who are genuinely undecided about an issue and want to learn about it. You think the latter?
I think a little bit of both. I have no delusions that we are saving the world and changing a lot of people's opinions, but I think maybe we're helping a little.
Gotcha. Andrew, you ready to go here? What is completely optional knowledge about?
So Completely Optional Knowledge is a show where we have our listeners come to us with questions, weird questions, strange questions about science and the natural world, and we try and answer those questions for them.
It's a funny title for a program because, of course, everybody wants to suggest that what they are putting out there is completely, absolutely necessary to your existence, without which you won't be able to go on, and yet you tell us in the title, this is actually completely optional.
Right. Well,
what was the thinking there?
It's a bit of a backlash for me. You know, our show is sponsored by Greenpeace, and they came to me and said, hey, we want to do a podcast. You know, what ideas do you have? And I think for me, I'm, you know, an environmentalist myself, and I think there's so many podcasts, and especially when you're talking about the environment, it can so easily get into that realm of you're eating vegetables, you know, of here's what you need to do, here's what's at stake, which of course is really important. But I'm like, let's go the completely optional, or let's go the opposite direction. And it was almost a tongue-in-cheek title of like, what you're listening here is going to be goofy, it's going to be weird. Of course, it's never is that off the wall. It's kind of like we take these weird questions, these almost like questions you'd be too embarrassed to ask a smart person, and they kind of lead us to these places that are unexpected and kind of cool and kind of have you, we would never explicitly say this, but walking away being like, oh, how awesome is our planet, right?
Well, I like the question, what does the sun sound like? That was a good question.
I mean, that one from the outset is an example of one like, can we answer this? And in looking into it, you know, we found someone who basically, you know, takes data and makes it into music. I mean, I'm a person who went to space. I'm a space camp graduate, okay? So I know that you can't hear the sun, okay? There's no air in space, but it was just like, it's almost like a thought exercise of like, what if we did try and answer this question and it gets us to some pretty unexpected places?
What's the wackiest question you've ever had?
One that stands out for me is what does a tornado smell like? Because it's something that I never really thought of, and that was one of our first episodes, and we phoned up a storm chaser, and it turns out it smells like whatever it just went through, which kind of it makes sense, but I never would have thought if it goes through a cornfield, it smells like corn. If it goes through a wheat field, it smells like a bakery or something like that.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
How about, are there any questions you've had in that you've thought, boy, I just can't answer that?
We skirt around it. If we can't truly answer it, we'll do like a sleight of hand where it's like, we didn't answer that, but check out this cool thing that's kind of related, you know? So it's like at the end of the day, I don't think we're not mandated legally to answer these questions to a T, but I think if we can give them something entertaining and that gets people asking other questions, then I think we've done our job.
One more quickie. I noticed that like your podcast I listened to was about 20 minutes long. Yours were longer. Yours are 10 minutes, short, little bite-sized.
Right.
How come so short?
Well, we were talking a little bit earlier about, I think, coming from public radio and being trained as someone who makes radio documentaries, you kind of get the sense of, you're on real terrestrial radio, you're bound to a clock. And so you're always trying to carve out time and trying to not have a flabby story. And I think it comes from that. I come from, I learned how to make radio. And I think it's also just like, when they're selling cereal, they say part of a complete breakfast. I think it's like, this is part of a complete podcasting listening repertoire. You need the hour-long documentaries, but you also want, I know when I'm walking to the grocery store, I'm like a 10-minute podcast is perfect sometimes.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay, Lindsay, here we go. Podcast playlist. What's that?
It's a radio show that takes the very best moments from the very best podcasts, and we put them in one hour-long show on your radio on CBC. So you can kind of hear a bunch of like really amazing stories back to back, but also you can find your new favorite podcast.
There are thousands upon thousands out there. How do
There
you narrow
are.
this down?
Oh my gosh. We spend so much time listening. We have a team with like two really amazing producers who spend hours and hours listening to everything that's out there. I watch the iTunes charts to see what's up there. We also read every article that comes out. We get tons of listener suggestions on social media and through email. Also, our friends recommend stuff to us. And now makers, when they come out with a new podcast, are starting to send us emails to let us know that they exist, and so we can check them out.
What kind of podcast stories work well in your format?
Okay, so it's funny because there is a way to get every podcast on the radio, but there's lots of things in podcasting that don't work on the radio.
Like what?
So there's a lot of podcasts I like. One of them is it's a podcast about how did this get made. So it's all of these film comedians just kind of joking about the film industry and terrible movies. I love listening to it. It's like sometimes like 2 hours long, but you can't put it out on the radio because people are not invested. Because when people are listening to a podcast, they're tuning in because they know what they're going to listen to and they know what to expect. Whereas radio, you could reach anyone. So someone might not want to hear 2 hours of people like making fun of a film. So we try to take the very best moment that's universal, maybe that's short and snappy, and then we put that in our show.
Now, have you yourself ever done a podcast?
I have done a podcast. I did a podcast a while ago when I was not working at CBC.
What was it about?
It was actually weird. I was working for a choir company, and so I made a podcast about choirs. And I made it in French and English. It was a weird bilingual
Wow.
podcast.
What was it called?
I don't remember actually anymore.
Did it suck, or why isn't it around anymore?
I don't know. Oh, because I stopped working for that company.
Oh, I see.
I was the only one who made it. I love podcasts, so I suggested they start the podcast there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many? You obviously subscribe to many yourself and
lot.
listen all the time?
Yeah.
How many?
Well, you know what? I recently had to delete a bunch because my phone memory got full. Because I was like, it was like 100, and so I kind of
100
maxed
different
out.
podcasts.
I maxed out and had to start deleting them because I can't listen to all of them all the time. So basically, I have to kind of like dip in and dip out of all my favorites.
There's so much great stuff out there,
Yeah,
though,
there's
isn't
a
there?
lot,
It
yeah.
really is hard to decide what makes the cut and what doesn't.
It is, although I feel like when you listen to it, like you just know, like there's it's the thing that, it's like when you listen to a new record and you meet your friend for beer and you're like, oh man, you really have to hear this track by blah, blah, blah. It's like the thing that makes you want to tell someone else to listen. Like when I'm listening and I want to like turn around to the person beside me and say, you have to listen to this 5 minutes, that's how I know like that's what goes on the show.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk more broadly now about this phenomenon. I want to know, Phoebe, I mean, podcasting is kind of this funny, new, very hip, modern-sounding name. How is this not just radio on demand?
I think it is radio on demand, and
what
I
it
think
is.
that's fine to say. I mean, I had always been in radio, in public radio, and I remember when we first thought about the idea of Criminal, I said, no, this has to be a radio show. I didn't understand how anyone would find a podcast, and I'd always, on a radio, there's some weight. I feel like you turn the radio on, and it's this curated entertainment in some way, so you think that it's important and special and good. And I was very scared about doing a podcast, and then I realized slowly that podcasting, the power of podcasting, that I still think we're just kind of seeing now. We're just beginning. It allows the listener the opportunity to decide, I'm going to turn this on. I want this now. And that means that choice that they've made, instead of being given something, as we are given on the radio, the choice to listen to something, I think makes a greater connection between the listener and the show. They're saying, I'm taking this 20 minutes of my day, and I'm going to care enough to listen to Criminal. Well, that's a great responsibility that I feel then, because I think to myself, well, I can't let them down,
Can I make a confession here?
Yes.
I play your podcast at double speed, so it only takes me 10 minutes to listen to
Never
you.
tell me that. Never tell me
Is that a terrible thing to
I
fess
think
up to?
For a podcaster, that's a little death. But
At least 1.5 speed.
Yeah.
Don't do
1.5?
double, right? At least,
but that's fine. I mean, you're allowed to, and that's the greatest thing about podcasting. Anyone can make a podcast.
I can
and
listen to twice as many if I do it twice.
You can listen to it as whichever way you like. And so that's why people are feeling so empowered by podcasts. You don't need anything fancy. You can have an iPhone and talk to your friend and put it up there, and there you go. You have a podcast.
You have this very kind of lovely public radio persona about you, and you have that public radio voice when you do your program. I'm kind of imitating a little badly there. You have this kind of ebullient personality that sort of bursts out there, and I wonder how much of the personality of the host do you think is the attraction for why people tune in?
I knew. I was thinking the opposite of Phoebe's beautiful voice. I was like, oh God, it's gonna be like this Australian, like, oh, hey guys, how's science going? Yes, that is my voice, and I grew up in a very large family, so I have a loud voice. I think the personality does matter a lot with a podcast because you are choosing, as Phoebe said, to select. You have this kind of bond with the host in a way that kind of like your friend. I know the podcasts I listen to, you do feel it is a little bit more intimate, your connection with them, because you've selected this, you're spending the time with it. And if you don't like them, and because with podcasts, people tend to go on tangents a little bit, they start talking, they have these little in-jokes that develop over time, sort of over 20 episodes, 50 episodes, and then you sort of get in line with that. And you like it, or you don't like it because it can be quite indulgent. So either you get on board with the host or you don't. So I think personality has a really big role to play, possibly more than in radio. Yeah.
Andrew, I want to get a little kind of, I don't know, philosophical and touchy-feely here. And that is, obviously none of this existed when I was a kid, and we listened to the radio, and a lot of us had that shared experience of listening to the same thing at the same time, and therefore it was a shared experience. Podcasting is, in some respects, absolutely a metaphor for our times, which is everybody in their own space, in their own time, with their earbuds on, shutting out the rest of the world. It's a solitary experience. Is that worse as a result?
I mean, I think for me, and you're right, it is a lot like, now with on-demand television, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, people go to different, instead of the water cooler, you go to the message board, or you go to social media, right? Where the nice thing about podcasts is that you have, I think the connection that you have with them is so much more heightened because it's so, the hosts are so personal. You think you're kind of friends with these people. So the people that you connect with who also like this podcast, you feel a stronger bond with them. So maybe not everyone's listening to the same thing and having a huge experience, but for you and this other person that you find, I mean, sometimes, Lindsay said that she likes the How Did This Get Made podcast, and I just want to pull her aside and be like, did you listen to this episode? Did you listen to that episode? So it's we're all kind of in our individual pods or whatever spheres, but we're all having a shared experience that way because we're opting into this show that we like, if that makes sense.
Lindsay, let me get you on that. Certainly there is something to be gained. You can listen to whatever you want, whenever you want, at the speed you want, and stop it when you want and pick it up later. But is something lost as well?
You know what? I think they're just two different mediums. So it's like, what do you get from TV and what do you get from radio? I worked in radio, and now I'm diving into the podcast world. And I think I used to work in live radio, which is amazing. And it's like a way to get direct information. And when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is I turn on the radio. I don't want to listen to a podcast. Obviously CBC. Obviously. Listen to my colleague. But
that would be Matt Galloway.
That would be Matt Galloway.
That would be the lovely and talented
the wonderful
Matt Galloway.
Yes,
he
my
is
co-host.
fabulous.
Yeah, so I listen to that every morning because I want to get information. I want to feel connected to my community that's around me and that's immediate. And it's great for news. But I don't know if podcasting has cracked the code for kind of daily, immediate news yet. That's something that you don't have. What podcasting does have, though, that is even more pronounced than in radio is intimacy. You feel like people often say to CBC radio hosts, they're like, oh, I feel like I know you already. But podcasting, I feel like that's times 100 because you're usually listening alone. You're listening when you're giving your full attention to the podcast. It's right in your earbuds. And so it has this kind of power and connection that I think is sometimes even more profound than radio.
What's your sense of that, Phoebe?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think that people are alone listening to you, and it's quiet. And but I also think, I always still hope that I can be on the radio again. Any chance I get to be on the radio, they'll say, Phoebe, do you want to come fill in? I say, yes, please. I miss it so much. Because there's this immediacy. A lot of podcasts, certainly Criminal, is very produced, and that voice that I'm doing on the podcast, even though it might be sped up when you listen to it, I spent a long time thinking about, am I saying these words right? When you're live, it's this great fun because you can respond to everything that's going on, and so I think that there is a place for both. I hope that we will always have radio and podcasting, and I think there's a fear sometimes that this on-demand listening will take away from the radio audience, and I really hope that never happens. I mean, I certainly, as a podcaster, turn on the radio every morning, and that's how I start my day, and I hope that continues for a long time.
Do you get CBC Radio in Durham, North Carolina?
No, I admire CBC, but we have NPR down south.
Oh yes, NPR.
See, the other thing is this kind of sense of serendipity that you lose as well, sometimes not listening to the radio. Whereas the radio, I remember the first time I listened to Wiretap on CBC, and I'm like, what is this? I was waiting to pick up my wife and just turn on the radio late at night. So you do lose that a little bit too with podcasting, where you can kind of be in your own sphere a little bit. Though some podcasts, I mean, even like Phoebe's is like, I wouldn't think I'd be interested in bourbon smuggling, but some of the best podcasts do factor in that serendipity, right? Where they curate the stories that they think you'll like. But what's nice about radio is you can turn it on and you're not expecting to hear something, and you hear something you didn't know you were interested in it.
Well, okay, that's a good place. Lindsay, I want to go to you next after that, because you for your job have to listen to so many different ones, and therefore I need to know this. Was it 2 years ago that Serial burst onto the scene?
2014?
2 or 3?
2014? 2014,
okay.
yeah.
For those who don't know, Serial was an attempt by some NPR folks, I think National Public Radio folks in the States, to look at a murder case. The guy had gone to jail, but there were questions surrounding the case. And they literally decided every week to tell a story about the reinvestigation they were doing. And this thing just exploded. I mean, they had millions of people paying attention to this thing in a way that no other podcast had broken through.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, why that one? Any sort of speculation as to why that one broke through?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think you started the show by saying that the Serial is something that people have always been interested in. And I think that Serial was one of the first shows to really take that idea, apply it to the real world, have a really strong first-person host, and run with it. And also, they had a lot of credibility because they're coming from This American Life, which is kind of the gold standard for public radio in North America.
That show, wasn't
That's
it?
right, and they started promoting it on that show. So I think and plus they did an amazing job with it. Like they killed it. It's like really great to listen to.
It's a funny choice of words.
It's great radio. Oh man, it is a funny choice of words. Anyway, they did a great job, and I think that all of those things and the fact that podcasting, people were just starting to be really interested in it in like a large scale way. I think that all those things happened at once, and that's why that specific podcast took off.
You say they had a great host, and yes, she was good, but she had a very, I'll put this to you, she had a real classic National Public Radio kind of voice, which is to say not a big brassy sort of announcer type voice. She had a real soft, low-key, I mean, way more than you. That kind of worked for her for some reason. Any speculation as to why?
I think that that's probably Sarah Koenig's voice, and just like, this is my voice, and, that's Wendy's. I mean, I think that the things that are successful are the ways are the ones that we are just who we are. When you're pretending to be something, when you're pretending to be an expert in something, when you're pretending to be a character, the listeners can see through that because people see through falseness, I mean, so people just want a host that's themselves, and I think authentic, and that's why Sarah Koenig worked so well on that show, because she was just herself, and she was just...
And not a classic radio voice by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
she won't want me saying that, I guess, but it's true.
I mean, she did it as well as anyone has done it before, and paved the way for podcasting and for all of us to kind of be able to make our livings now making a podcast. Serial did it exactly right.
Yeah. I think the classic radio voice, I hope the classic radio voice is kind of on its way out. Because what it does is it limits it. It limits who can be a broadcaster. You have to have a specific kind of accent. You have to be a specific kind of person. Like, it's very limiting to the types of people you see, like, on the radio and on podcasts. And I think what's so cool about podcasting is you hear so many different voices, so many different accents, so many different types of people.
Even Australian accents.
Even Australian accents. So it really opens it up.
I mean, it's true, because the classic radio voice is ultimately a middle-aged white man.
That's right, and it's authoritative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is still the voice of authority.
Yeah.
And so then kind of you maybe move towards the kind of maybe soft-spoken middle-aged white woman, and now we can move in other directions. I really think that podcasts open it up and like change the way that we look at what is an authoritative voice. And we still, in Science Versus, we still come against people saying, who is this, this brash Australian speaking facts, speaking science? What is this? I don't trust you. I don't like this voice. This sort of focus on the voice. And I think it's kind of the wrong way to look at it. Ultimately, it's like, what is the information coming from that voice? And do you trust it, and does it make sense to you?
So podcasts, in a way, have opened up the possibilities for different sounding people to represent authority.
I think
that's
so,
a good thing.
Because the barrier to entry is so much smaller. Because if you want to get a show on the ABC or CBC or NPR, you have to ultimately go through the powers that be, who are looking for a classic radio voice, a voice of authority that their listeners will go, aha, I believe what they're saying. But with podcasting, sort of anyone can do it.
Phoebe just said something that I want to, I don't know about challenge, but I do want to follow up on, which is you make a living doing this. And that's news to me, because from what I hear, almost nobody makes a living podcasting. And I want to know, Andrew, start us off here. Can you make a living podcasting?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, the folks here will tell you that. I mean, I'm a freelancer, and this gig that I do, I mean, 3 years ago, would a brand be open to doing a podcast? They wouldn't know what you're talking about, So for freelancers, for people who do this job full time, I think it's totally possible. And I think the nice thing is, I mean, there's lots of people who don't look at this as a career. Going back to this radio voice thing, I think some of the great thing about podcasting is that it's got this sort of like punk rock DIY ethos to it. Like there's a lot of podcasts out there that are very polished and highly produced. But there's a lot out there that just say, hey, I want to make something, and you can find your audience that way.
Okay, but how do you make money? Nobody pays to listen to your show.
Right. Well, I'm a bit of a different. I'm a little bit different than these folks in that I went to a brand, or they're saying it's like branded content. Right,
Greenpeace sponsors you.
That's right.
So
yeah.
So they're putting money into it.
Exactly.
That pays the bills.
And they pay a premium because they're the sole advertiser. And I don't have to. If I was an independent producer, if I just wanted to make this on my own, I'd probably have to do a Kickstarter, or I'd probably have to go to a place like Midroll that sells ads for you. In order to do that, I'd have to build my audience first. So it's for me as a freelance producer, I'm like, this is a great way to do it. And you get to do something that is a little bit off the beaten path than what you'd want to normally sell to advertisers.
Does your show make money?
Absolutely. Well, for Radiotopia and Gimlet Media, it's a very different profile. So we do have branded content at Gimlet Media, but Science Versus has advertisers on it, and so does Criminal. And it has become a new space and a very enticing space for advertisers, because ultimately, if you have 500,000 listeners, and in this couple that with this intimate environment where it's in your ear, and at Gimlet Media, the hosts actually sort of say the content. We have very specific sort of guidelines about advertising and content, but it is my voice saying it. And so it is very enticing. And so Gimlet Media at the moment is very profitable.
It's interesting. We've gone away from the day where Hugh Downs hosting the Today Show used to come on and say Alpo is great for your dog, because everybody thought it was terrible for the host to be associated with a product. So no hosts advertised or read advertising. It's gone completely. We're back there.
It's just like old time soap operas.
The hosts
and we're
now
back
read
to
the ads.
Serials. Like we're back to the 1950s radio.
Although the
Maybe selling
difference is,
cigarettes.
I have to say, the difference is, well, one, the cigarettes. At least at Gimlet Media, we do try and differentiate it so it's not so endorsed of I love my Coca-Cola. There is a separation. There's music separation. It's not so much, but you do dance around that issue.
But okay, let me get a couple of examples that come to mind. Jesse Brown is one of the kings of podcasting in Canada, and he talks about this mattress that he loves and gets a great sleep on, and et cetera, et cetera. And what else? I hear the guys who do the 538 podcast talk about MyUndies and how these underwear feel so fantastic. Is this a little weird?
Yes, but
But they're great underwear.
you as I think most podcasters, at Criminal, we make the decision. Yes, we will have them as a sponsor, and we turn down sponsors all the time.
You do?
Absolutely. I cannot. I mean, it doesn't match the tone of the show. It doesn't match. There's many sponsors that we turn down, and we're still at the point where we say, okay, well, we could make a little more money if we took this sponsor. I don't care, and so we have complete control. And so when we read these ads and I hope that what you do is you try to do service to the company that wants to sponsor the show, but you're also doing service to your listeners and saying, I'm going to put this information out, do with it what you will.
I don't, Phoebe, I don't want to sound holier than thou on this. I'm really not trying, because we have sponsors for this program, the Chartered Accountants, Bruce Power. I mean, we have sponsors who contribute to keeping us on the air here and keeping the lights on. We don't interrupt the content, and I don't ever read any script on behalf of those advertisers / sponsors. So does that make me purer than you?
No, listen, I did that for a decade. I was in public radio. I never read anything. And then I decided, wait a second, I want my own show. And how am I going to get my own show? I'm going to be a podcaster. And how am I going to pay for myself to make this show for my listeners? I'm going to do sponsors. And this new wild west of podcasting, I'm going to keep to our highest standards and say, we are going to have these sponsors, which are going to allow me to make this show for you, our audience. Bear with me for 30 seconds.
And the sponsors have to reflect your values. So who have you turned down? You don't have to tell me a company name, but what kind of a product would you have turned down?
We turn down, sometimes we turn down banks. Sometimes we turn down products, beauty products. We turn down things that we find to be just not something. And we also turn down things that I would never use. I mean, we really say, well, wait, I don't understand this product. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it. I can't really figure it out.
Okay, so that's got some integrity there.
And I think that if we were being forced, if podcasters are being forced to put things on that they didn't want, maybe then we have a conversation. But we're still at the point where I think we have the authority to say, not on our show.
I think your idea of the Wild West is apt, where you come from a place where, and you as well, Gimlet comes from a place where they still use the basis of public media in a way, and they have their own internal sort of guidelines for advertising. There's different music when you hear an ad on something on Gimlet, whereas you mentioned some other podcasts, some other people who aren't rooted in public radio might be totally okay with shilling for whoever and putting it in and having branded content that's not marked as such and things like that. So I think we're seeing, big places like Gimlet and Radiotopia set the standards for what people do, but I don't think there's anything, I think it still is a Wild West in that sense for independent producers if you want to shill things on your podcast.
Let's take our remaining moments here and just figure out how widespread and or popular you guys are. Here we go. According to Edison Research, only 21% of Americans over the age of 12 have listened to a podcast in the last month. And that is way higher than in any other year. Only 1/3 of Americans have ever listened to a podcast at all. Wendy, are you guys still a relatively select niche product?
We are, but to me those figures are actually quite high. You did the cheeky only 20%, but that's 1 in 5 Americans listening to podcasts.
Well, but 100% of Americans watch television, right?
Ooh,
Well, they do.
I'm not sure. I mean, if you're including on demand but not classic, not traditional television, I would.
No, all right. I see what you're saying. But
but it's a growing market. I mean, absolutely. This is in no way dominating the field of media podcasting, but those numbers seem fairly high to me, and I think they will continue to grow because the technology just makes it so easy. You download an app, you find what you like, you put your earphones in, hopefully not your earplugs. And so I think that those numbers, I'm quite buoyed by those numbers, actually.
Well, let me follow up again. Lindsay, the Super Bowl is 100 million audience.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. The Grey Cup will be 6 million. Mm-hmm. What's a good podcast fetch?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. I don't really deal with numbers. I deal with content. So I actually don't. Anybody have a better?
Yeah, I think This American Life, which is the top, probably gets 1 million downloads, I would want to say, an episode. I would say your average, your good quality podcast is probably getting 500,000 plus an episode. Phoebe, is that what you would?
Criminal gets almost 4 million downloads a month.
You get 4 million downloads a month.
Almost 4 million. So let's just be safe and say 3. Now that's not per episode, that's over the whole catalog. We have 54 episodes, and so that's just people that are actually downloading. It could be the same person downloading all 54 episodes, but that's how many times the show is downloaded. But I don't think but that changes for every show, and it doesn't mean that, one show is more popular than the other. It just means there are more episodes of 54 episodes of Criminal to
It
download.
also doesn't mean they're necessarily listening to it, right?
Or what speed they're listening to it.
Or what speed.
Yeah, or what speed. I mean, I think that all of this, that's the thing about, we're all just kind of muddling our way through and trying to figure out, what's right and how we, at the base of this is that we keep talking about this word podcast, but really this is just good content will be successful, just like on the radio. No one's going to listen to a boring radio show. No one's going to listen to a boring, poorly produced podcast. And I think at the end of the day, it's just, what is the best content we can put out there? That's the only thing that matters.
Do you imagine a day, and if you do, tell me when it's going to happen, when people will, as the cliche goes, gather around the water cooler and talk about the podcast they all heard the day before?
Oh, in my circles, it 100% is
Yeah, that
already.
day's here.
That day's here.
That happens all the
Cereal.
time.
That cereal broke the bank on that one. That was
The Serial, I don't know, was Serial a one-off? I mean, they did it, but
No,
Well,
I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I think what happened is not that Serial happened and then no one listened to podcasts anymore. I think Serial happened and then you saw a bunch of other amazing podcasts come up, and now the market's diverse. It's like when Netflix started making original content, people talked about the 1 or 2 shows they had, and now there's so many. I think the same's happening in podcasting. There's just so much to talk about that there's not a central focus anymore.
gotcha. I loved having all 4 of you in today. This was great because I'm a podcast freak, and keep on keeping on is what I'm trying to
We'll
say.
chat at the water cooler later.
Let's do that. That's Andrew Norton. Completely optional knowledge, which actually is quite must listening. And Phoebe Judge, the host of Criminal. And on the other side of the table, Lindsay Michael, co-host of CBC Radio Show Podcast Playlist, and Wendy Zuckerman, the host of Science Versus. Thank you, podcasters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.